Morning light laid a soft glaze over the savannah when the ground gave way beneath a playful calf. She is Ellie, a weeks-old elephant learning the rhythm of her feet. One careless step, and the thin crust broke, dropping her into a hidden mud pit. The world narrowed to suction and fear. Above, her mother, Grace, flared her ears, trumpeted raw panic, and pounded the rim with frantic steps. Mud swallowed sound and hope together. Ellie tried to kick, but each motion dragged her deeper, slick as oil, heavy as grief. Dust rose, birds scattered, and the herd converged in a thunder of feet. This was not a fight they knew how to win. The pit pulled like a living thing. Every second cost air. Every heartbeat measured distance between a child and the surface. Somewhere nearby, something listened and weighed the silence. Grace scanned the ragged lip, circling as if motion alone could lift her child. She reached, trunk extended, but the walls crumbled, slick clay sliding under her weight. The herd pressed closer, a tide of muscle and memory, their trumpets pulsing across the open grass. Dust tasted bitter on the tongue. Fear tasted worse. Ellie's eyes shone with milk-blue worry, lids fluttering against grit. One ant tried to dig, scooping with her trunk. Another shouldered the edge, but the pit defeated them all, steep, treacherous, freshly formed by last night's storm. Hope thinned to threads. In the distance, vultures curved lazy circles, reading the ground like a map of endings. Grace planted her feet and roared again, the sound a flare sent into a vast sky. If help existed, it had to hear now. The savannah, usually indifferent, held its breath.
There are moments that brand themselves into time. This was one. Grace's body trembled, yet she steadied, heart pounding against the cage of her ribs. She pressed close to the rim, angling her trunk to brush Ellie's mud-caked head, passing comfort the only way she could. The herd formed a crescent, a living barricade against chance. Calves huddled behind matriarchs. Young bulls paced, their anxiety throwing sparks. Ellie's breaths came shallow, nostrils rimmed with sludge. The mud had a metallic smell, like wet earth and old lightning. Grace made a vow, one only a mother can make, not a step back, not a moment lost, not a world allowed to close over her child. The promise vibrated through her bones, out through the ground and into the day. Somewhere past the tall grass, curiosity woke in something powerful and kind. Fear is a language even giants speak. A few elephants, spooked by the collapsing edge, drifted outward, their feet testing safer ground. Others stood firm, eyes dark with resolve. The line between staying and fleeing cut through the herd like a seam. A young bull stamped, then retreated 2 trembling steps, only to surge forward again, unable to choose. Dust devils spun between bodies. Grace anchored the center, shoulders squared, trunk tracing circles of reassurance she barely felt. The pit's rim sloved away each time a trunk reached over, turning rescue into risk. Breath by breath, the herd's mighty cohesion frayed, until the oldest matriarch rumbled low, an iron note calling them back to purpose. They tightened formation, not from certainty, but from duty. Across the grass, reeds swayed. A shadow lingered at the tree line, watching, thinking, deciding.
Survival is a chain of choices, each with a cost. The matriarch signaled a new attempt. Dig high, slope the rim, give Ellie something solid to push against. They worked in frantic rhythm, scoop, toss, brace, repeat. Yet the mud behaved like a living sink, swallowing their effort, turning steps into slick slides. Ellie's legs thrashed, then slowed. The herd tried to pull, trunks laced, but the lip crumbled again, collapsing like stale bread. Time dilated into aching seconds. Grace leaned so far her front feet skidded, stopping on instinct just shy of catastrophe. A quiet settled, not peace but exhaustion wearing a mask. The matriarch's eyes, old calculating, flicked toward the forest. The wind carried a scent unfamiliar to this crisis. Musky, leaf green, powerful. The herd stiffened. Something large had answered the sound, something that did not belong to them. Between the gold of grass and the emerald hush of forest, a silhouette held steady. Shoulders like boulders under dark fur, chest broad as a drum, head crowned with the calm of an ancient judge. He stepped forward once, then paused, measuring distance and danger. This was Apollo, a silverback gorilla who ruled the forest by quiet certainty rather than noise. He had heard the trumpet of fear, the universal alarm. Forest life tuned every sense to stories the wind carried. This one was urgent, strange, and worth the risk. He watched the herd's shifting mass, noted the slick geometry of the pit, and recognized panic's pattern. The savannah is not his court, yet compassion redraws borders. Apollo set his knuckles to ground, weight moving in deliberate waves. He did not posture, he simply began to cross the open light.
The herd turned as one. A gorilla here was an answer no one expected. Apollo's gait spoke of power banked, not flaunted. Sun burnished the silver across his back as he closed the distance, unhurried and utterly focused. He read the ground the way a carpenter reads wood grain, where it would hold, where it would split. He read Grace's eyes too, storm bright, pleading, fierce. The matriarch tested him with a low warning rumble, but Apollo offered only presence, no challenge. In a place ruled by weight and momentum, he was geometry solving itself. He stopped at the rim, leaned forward, and studied the mud's give. Air tasted of clay and adrenaline. Without fanfare, he anchored one massive hand, then another, and lowered a foot toward the suction below. The herd did not understand his logic, only his intent. Intent was enough. Apollo straddled the lip, feeling for purchase as the ground shivered under his mass. He was built for vertical jungle, not this horizontal hazard. Yet problem-solving is a kind of strength too. He tested the edge, pressed, shifted, learned its limits in seconds. Grace stepped closer, a statue of trembling restraint, her trunk hovering near his shoulder like a blessing she didn't know how to grant. Ellie blinked up, eyes glazed but aware of the shadow above that didn't threaten. The herd murmured, a sound like distant thunder smoothing itself. Apollo lowered further, arms extending, torso angling to distribute weight. Mud lapped greedy at his legs, eager to claim new quarry. He adjusted again, reading suction, preparing a path not of escape but of leverage. He was a bridge made of intention and muscle.
There is a point where thinking stops and choosing begins. Apollo reached for Ellie, fingertips spreading against her mud-slick flank. The touch was firm, not crushing, a craftsman handling fragile cargo. He set his other hand against the opposite wall, triangulating force. Breath moved through him like a bellows, steady, controlled. The herd compressed the circle, braced on hope as if it had weight. Time stretched thin enough to see through. Apollo shifted, gathered, and committed, pushing up and back, turning the pit's pull against itself. Mud resisted with 1,000 tiny hands. Ellie's body slid, then jolted upward half a hand's breadth. It wasn't victory, it was proof. Proof is fuel. Grace's rumble turned into a low-frequency prayer. Apollo inhaled clay air and mapped his next attempt, knowing each second thickened the trap beneath him. Bodies held still, minds sprinted. Apollo paused just long enough to reset his grip and study the angle of Ellie's shoulder. The pit's rim had softened where trunks had scraped. He would have to lift higher, faster, or lose what ground he'd gained. He listened, yes, listened, to the rhythm of the herd's breath, the count of hearts surrounding the circle. In that quiet, decision clarified like water settling. He braced his feet, widened his stance, and bent his elbows into coiled springs. Above, sunlight shifted behind a thin cloud, taking some heat off the clay. Small mercies matter. Grace's trunk hovered inches from Ellie's ear, drawing a line of connection from despair to action. Apollo exhaled, a measured release, and pushed again, ready for the storm of effort that would follow, ready to trade comfort for a stranger's life.
Mud has a physics of its own: pressure, suction, memory. Apollo met all three with patience that looked like power. He sank to the thighs, accepting the cost. then drove his hands beneath Ellie's rib line, seeking the angle that would break the seal. The suction fought like an invisible rope around her waist. He rocked her gently first, micro movements teaching the mud to let go in increments. Every shift slid him deeper. He adjusted, elbows carving ledges into the wall, turning liquid into structure. Ellie's sides fluttered, nostrils flaring for air. The herd's murmur steadied into a hum, a choir of encouragement without words. Apollo's heartbeat slowed, then surged, commitment given muscle. He lifted. Ellie rose, an inch, two, and the suction screamed beneath the surface. Clay splattered his chest, stung his eyes. He did not blink. He only lifted again. Progress is cruel when it backslides. A smear of mud broke under Apollo's grip, and Ellie slid, her tiny legs bicycling uselessly. For a breath, panic flashed, there, then conquered. Apollo changed tactics on instinct, shifting his right hand higher, fingers splayed from maximum friction. He pressed Ellie against the firmer section of wall, using the pit itself as brace. The technique demanded savage control. Too much force would harm what he meant to save. He balanced strength with careful intent, a razor's edge on a moving surface. Grace leaned closer, rumble turning to a thread-fine whisper in her chest. Ellie's eyes cleared a fraction. She sensed the rhythm, tried to push on Apollo's forearm with a weak tremor. Cooperation, born in crisis, found a pulse. The pair moved as one machine, awkward, determined, and increasingly effective.
The suction fought, but the real enemy was fatigue. Apollo's muscles burned with lactic fire, his breath shortening into clipped bursts. He had crossed the line few dare, giving more than the situation seemed to allow. He dug his toes for purchase, found none, and relied on grip alone. Mud glued him to its hunger. With a grunt that never sharpened to rage, he turned the grunt into leverage, sound into force. Ellie's spine rose another precious inch, her head tipped toward air that tasted of dust and sunrise. The herd felt the change ripple through the circle. A calf squeaked. The matriarch held everyone steady with a stern, subsonic note. Apollo blinked mud from his lashes, refocused, and sank his will deeper than his feet. The pit might have the ground, but it would not have the day. Agency returns in small sparks. Ellie's hind legs found the barest friction on Apollo's forearm. She pushed, frail, wobbly, but real, giving him the counterforce he needed. He adjusted his left hand to cradle her flank, turning a slip into a shelf. Grace's breath washed over them, warm and earthy, a tether pulling Ellie toward the surface. The air rang with heartbeat and grit. Apollo's back became a platform, broad and unwavering despite the tremor beginning at his shoulders. He lifted on a rising curve, not a jerk, letting mud release without tearing skin. Ellie's trunk bobbed, seeking purchase on nothing, then something. The rim, crumbly but close. Hope became architecture. The herd stepped in unison, redistributing weight around the perilous edge. Every detail aligned for a moment, slender as a reed. Slender, but enough to hold a life.
Life's alarms echoed wide. Hyenas materialized at the periphery, their eyes beating with opportunistic light. Farther off, a crocodile's armored back parted a shallow channel, reading commotion as invitation. The herd pivoted, forming a living wall, heads low, tusks angled, calves tucked behind knees. The matriarch advanced 3 paces and held, a silent line drawn in dust. Predators, built to challenge fear, challenged caution instead. Their steps faltered beneath the stare of giants. Apollo did not look up. He read the change through vibration alone. The ground speaks when many feet decide together. He answered that trust by redoubling effort, accepting more mud, less dignity, and the same unwavering goal. Ellie's breathing steadied by degrees. The world pressed close now. Danger outside, danger beneath. salvation balanced delicately in the span of two steady hands. The herd's formation matured into intention. Shoulder to shoulder, they made geography out of bodies, a fortress of calm fury. Dust hung in the air like smoke after a lightning strike. Hyenas paced, testing angles, but every lane narrowed into tusk and will. The crocodile, preferring certainty over spectacle, slid back into the channel, bubbles marking its retreat. The matriarch maintained the line, head inclined toward Apollo, as if acknowledging a foreign general fighting the same war. Grace stood one step behind the rim, ready to anchor the final pull with a mother's precision. Inside the circle, the atmosphere shifted from chaos to choreography. Each breath from the herd became a drumbeat. Each second extended Apollo's credit with his own strength. No one spoke because no one needed to. The plan was written in posture and purpose.
Victory tempts complacency, and the pit punished it. Apollo's right foot lost purchase, sliding a hand's breadth deeper. Suction surged, yanking at his hips. Pain flickered, a warning, not a deterrent. He corrected, widening his stance, elbows biting into clay shelves he'd carved. The mud answered with a greedy tug, trying to make him part of the problem he came to solve. He exhaled slowly, forcing panic to vacate his chest, then reset his grip beneath Ellie's shoulder blade. Fatigue can make a rescuer brittle. Apollo refused brittleness, choosing patience as armor. He thought like water, flowing around resistance until he found the seam. There, slight upward angle, leftward twist. Counterpush from Ellie's hind leg. The system cohered again. The pit had him, but not all of him, and not the part that mattered most. Ellie's calls thinned, turning from sharp alarms to fragile whimpers. It was the sound of a body rationing breath. Grace answered with a low, resonant rumble that slipped beneath the noise and touched the place where calm lives. Calm doesn't erase danger, it organizes it. Apollo let that note settle through his chest, and in the quiet that followed, he timed his next lift to the herd's inhale, using the collective rhythm as a metronome. Up, hold, breathe. Up, hold, breathe. Mud tried to rewrite the plan each time. He revised it back. Ellie's trunk brushed his wrist, a ghost of a touch that felt like a handshake between species. Above the rim, sunlight heated the clay again. He could not wait. He would not. The next push had to count more than the last, or the story ended here.
Help arrived in a language of balance. An older bull stepped forward, measured and immense, placing his trunk against the pit wall directly behind Apollo's back. He did not shove. He stabilized, turning the crumbling edge into a brace. His weight became architecture. Apollo leaned into that living pillar as if it were a tree grown for this moment. Grace inched closer, lining her trunk with Ellie's path, eyes fixed, decision already made. The herd shifted as one organism to compensate for the bull's move, closing ranks without command. Predators, reading the change, lost interest in odds that no longer favored them. The circle of defense evolved into a circle of collaboration. The final contest began. Gravity and suction on one side, intent and muscle on the other. Apollo drew breath down to the floor of his lungs, let it out in a controlled stream, and lifted in a slow arc. The bull's stabilizing trunk turned tremor into traction. Grace tracked Ellie's rise with surgical focus, never overreaching, never wasting inches. The rim shed crumbs and then clumps, but the structure held. Ellie's body gained a third hand's breadth, then a fourth. The angle tipped from impossible to inevitable. Mud burped as air rushed into spaces it had stolen. Apollo's forearms shook, but his grip never compromised. He was no longer moving a calf alone. He was moving a problem through a system designed in crisis by strangers. The earth tried again to claim what it had trapped. It failed.
Momentum arrived like thunder after lightning, predictable, unstoppable, earned. Apollo gathered the last of his strength and drove it upward in one clean heave, a movement that carried intention as much as force. Ellie rose high enough for sunlight to stripe her face, the mud released with a wet, reluctant sigh. Grace struck, not a strike of harm, but of precision, wrapping her trunk around Ellie's wrist-thick foreleg. She pulled with practiced certainty, guiding rather than yanking, reading Apollo's lift and matching it, note for note. The bull held the rim together with stillness that looked like stone. For a heartbeat, all forces aligned: earth, muscle, breath, will, and the world tilted in favor of life. Ellie's body cleared the lip. The pit, denied its prize, slumped into itself, a wound closing around empty air. Ellie sprawled onto firm ground, legs splayed, chest heaving against the weight of clotted mud. Grace flooded her with touch, sweeps to clear nostrils, presses to reassure, rumbles to tell the nervous system the storm had passed. The herd released sound all at once, a chorus that shook dust from acacia leaves. Relief is a weather system, and it rained over everyone. Apollo held his position a second longer, verifying stability before he moved. Then he shifted his hands, extracted each leg deliberately, and climbed from the pit like a man leaving a hard lesson. The earth clung to him in thick sheets. He wore the struggle openly, proof of the price paid and the outcome achieved. Ellie coughed, then stood wobbling, seeking her mother's shadow like a harbor. The day resumed its breath, deeper than before.
Strength always submits a receipt. Apollo's limbs trembled, not from fear, but from exertion tallied second by second. He planted his knuckles and lowered his head, drawing air in slow drafts to cool the furnace inside his chest. The herd quieted, as if a conductor had lifted a hand. No one rushed him. Even the wind seemed to pass softer over the grass. Mud streaked his fur in dark banners. His eyes stayed bright, unclaiming, focused on nothing to avoid asking for anything. Grace watched him with a kind of reverence rarely reserved for outsiders. There is a dignity in fatigue when it is earned saving someone small. Apollo took one step, then another, testing the truth of solid ground. He had given more than comfort. He had given time back to a family that almost lost it. Gratitude formed itself into geometry. The herd arranged in a wide ring around Apollo, not trapping, not challenging, simply enclosing him in recognition. Bodies that could crush instead created space. A calf peered from behind an ant's knees, bright-eyed, curious, unafraid. The matriarch held her chin low, an elder's nod framed by towering tusks. Dust settled in the quiet, drifting like soft applause. Apollo stood at the ring's center, unarmed but unconcerned, reading intent the way he had read the pit's edge, carefully, accurately. He did not beat his chest or claim dominion. He simply existed inside their gratitude, accepting it without misunderstanding. For a moment, the savannah and the forest ceased to be opposing addresses. They became one neighborhood, sharing a single, unarguable truth. Life recognizes itself and answers, even when no one is obligated to.
Grace stepped forward alone, the ring parting to let the moment find its shape. She moved slowly, each foot placed with ceremonial care, her trunk lifted and paused over Apollo's chest, hovering where his heart hammered against bone. Then, with the gentlest pressure, she touched him, one breath-long contact that translated 1,000 impossible sentences, acknowledgement, gratitude, kinship beyond categories. Apollo did not flinch. He met her gaze and let stillness carry the reply. Around them, the herd exhaled a shared breath, as if the entire plane had been waiting for permission to release tension. Ellie sidled under Grace's belly, safe harbor restored, eyes still wide with the residue of fear. The gesture sealed the story's promise. It also delivered the title's surprise. The herd didn't drive him away. They honored him, and the wild took note. At the fringe where danger had collected, quiet, defeated appetite. Hyenas faded into brush, their calculations rewritten by unity they could neither break nor benefit from. The crocodile's wake disappeared under ripples, its patience reserved for more ordinary afternoons. Vultures lifted higher, rings widening into irrelevance. The savannah's background music resumed, insects ticking like clocks, larks stitching sky to grass with thread-thin calls. Apollo turned, reading the perimeter for remaining threats, found none, and let his shoulders drop a fraction. The herd loosened the circle, not in dismissal, but in benediction. They had demonstrated what power is for. The predators had learned what it cannot touch. Lessons linger in dust longer than footprints. This one would mark the ground for days, then sink into memory, where the best truths learn to live.
Stories often demand speeches. The wild prefers pauses. In that pause, meaning settled where it needed to go. Grace leaned into Ellie, absorbing tremors until they flattened. The matriarch scanned faces, found calm returning, and hummed a note that meant movement could resume whenever hearts were ready. Apollo stood apart, present without intruding, like a tall rock that had always been there. The air smelled of wet clay, crushed grass, and something else, relief made tangible. We talk about predator and prey, borders and rivals, because categories are easy. But categories blur when hands lift what trunks cannot, when trunks steady what hands alone would fail to raise. Compassion is a toolkit that looks different in different bodies and still does the same job. The morning had proven that as clearly as hoofprints in soft ground. Eventually, life asked for momentum again. Grace guided Ellie forward, their steps short at first, then smoothing into the old cadence. The herd flowed around them like a river reclaiming its channel. No one hurried. Recovery has a pace that ignores clocks. Apollo angled toward the tree line, each step shedding a ribbon of drying mud. He did not look back for validation. He carried his own measure of what mattered. Shade pooled beneath the first trees, cool and green-edged, the forest's welcome mat. In the open, sunlight warmed the grass to a pale shimmer. Two worlds touched at their seam, and for a morning they had woven a shared fabric. The tear had been mended. The stitch would hold. The savannah released Apollo without regret. The forest accepted him without question. And the story moved into memory.
Not all witnesses stood in the light. From deeper shadow, shapes held still. Young males with restless shoulders, females with infants clutched close, an old rival with the patience of weathered stone. Apollo had been solitary by choice and necessity, but acts like today redraw maps within the mind. The troop watched him return wearing mud and meaning, measuring what this heroism might cost or grant. Leadership is a language of decisions. Today he had spoken it to strangers. Tomorrow, the forest might ask him to speak it at home. For a breath, tension rose, the kind that often lives between those who prefer safety and those who choose service. Apollo crossed the threshold without dramatics, only the steadiness that had turned crisis into outcome. Behind him, the savannah exhaled. Before him, the canopy listened. Some tales end with victory, better ones end with clarity. This morning declared that strength is not domination, but direction. Force aimed where it heals. A silverback built from mountains of leaves carried a calf out of a grave of mud.
A herd born to protect found a way to honor a stranger. Predators recognized a day when hunger ceded to something larger. Grace kept her promise. Ellie kept her life. Apollo kept nothing for himself and walked away richer. If there's a lesson worth packing for our own days, it's this: we are measured by the weight we choose to carry for others, especially when the ground gives way. Out there, miracles don't arrive with trumpets. They arrive with hands, trunks, and choices. Keep your eyes open. The wild is teaching, and today, it taught with love.